All right. My name is Parviz Malakouti Fitzgerald. I'm a mobility lawyer, citizenship and immigration lawyer, and this is our 14th mobility space on X. So this is our spaces on the hottest topics in freedom of movement, sovereignty, multiple citizenship. We're doing 50 mobility spaces this year. Anybody can join and anybody can talk. So today, if you want to talk, just send me a request and I'll approve it right away. So today's topic is passport strength rankings, BS or legitimate. And passport strength rankings, as long as I've been a mobility attorney, have been a really popular thing. It's kind of something that I think, even a layperson kind of gets excited about and interested in. And we have a whole bunch of, dueling lists throughout the industry. One of the first, if not the first, passport strength lists was made by Henley and Partners. And ever since I've seen these passport strength lists, I've always made me raise an eyebrow. I've not yet seen one that I think actually is sensible. And I don't mean just minor disagreements. Of course, reasonable minds can disagree on different things, even within the industry. But I don't believe I've even seen a single passport strength list that's actually that's even sensible at all. So, couple things. I find that I have three main points or three main issues with the majority of passport strength lists. The first thing is most of them are usually based off of visa-free access. Basically, they rank the passport. So first of all, they attribute the visa-free access. So however many countries a citizen of a certain country can go to visa-free, they attribute that as a quality of the passport. That's the first problem. That's a function of citizenship, not a passport. And the difference does matter. But typically, the vast majority of them, they just count up the number of countries that a person from a certain country can travel to visa-free, and then they quote unquote rank the passports that way. Okay, so my three problems are as follows. Okay, first of all, I don't think visa-free access is the most important aspect of a citizenship, generally speaking. Now, the reason I say generally speaking is because I am a believer of the concept of subjective value. So for some people out there that really badly need visa-free access, okay, for those individuals, it could be said that visa-free access is the most important component. People have different circumstances and needs. But generally speaking, if you go across the board, I don't believe visa-free access is the most important aspect or valuable aspect of a citizenship, even a second or third citizenship. That's number one. Number two, even if you did believe that visa-free access is the most important component of a citizenship, the way it's measured in the majority of these passport strength indices makes no sense at all. They just count up the number of countries without any weighting for how desirable a particular country is to go to. So this is how you wind up with absurdities. And I'll try not to pick on people in the industry or, I guess I'll try not to pick on particular lists, but there was a few lists in the last few years that I've had the Emirati passport listed up at the top without visa-free access to the United States. The United States has a lot of problems, right? We all know that. We talk about U.S. problems, but there's no doubt it's one of the most desirable visa-free or tourist destinations in the world. The idea that a passport ranking would not wait for desirability makes it completely senseless, in my point. So, in my opinion, so you have a country that doesn't have visa-free access to the United States, but they have visa-free access to some, third world country that is not a popular destination, and it would weight them equally on the list. That makes no sense to me. So that's the second beef that I have with it. And then the third beef is kind of what I mentioned at the beginning, which is these are not functions of a passport. Okay, all these benefits, visa-free access, core residency rights, satellite residency rights, springboarding, bridging residencies, consular assistance. These are all functions of citizenship, not passports. Passports are travel documents, identification documents, and in some circumstances, rebuttable proof of citizenship of a particular country. They're not the actual citizenship themselves. And that's a really important distinction. I think a lot of my listeners kind of already understand this concept pretty well, but it's a little bit more slow going with the public at large. So I have a lot of beef with these passport rankings. I think they're based on a misconception, or sorry, a misnomer, first of all, that passport is citizenship. And I think they measure the wrong things, and I think they even measure the wrong things the wrong way, right? So that's kind of my opening beef, we shall say. Now, obviously, if you're criticizing a system or a way of doing things, right, the natural next question is, well, okay, how would you do it? What do you think would possibly uh, make for a sensible? First of all, I wouldn't call it a passport strength list. I would call it a citizenship strength list. But what would make for a sensible citizenship strength list? And I don't have an easy, obvious answer of exactly what criteria I think it would be based on primarily. But I have a list of criteria and ways of measuring that I think, among them, I don't know which one is the best, but I think all of them are better than the current system, right? And so and this is what I'd like to do today. I'd like to basically throw out some ideas of what I think, about how citizenship should be properly measured, right? At least in a way that's functional, right? If we're not just talking about entertainment, but we're talking about lists that you can actually glean some information from, right? So the difference between information and entertainment. So I'll throw out a few ideas of what I think is sensible or could be sensible, and then obviously I'd like to open up the floor for conversation and hear other people's thoughts. As a reminder, I'm the host. That doesn't mean you cannot disagree with me. Please, by all means, if you disagree, come forth. Doesn't mean I'm going to roll over for you, but I'd like to hear it. Obviously, we're trying to get to the truth, right? We're not trying to be dogmatic in a particular approach. So, okay, so we got a good attendance here so far. We got Patrick, David, Patience, Robert, Jay. Jay, I'm going to invite you to speak as well. Robert, I think I invite you to speak. Okay, so first of all, it's my idea of citizenship in terms of benefits is really, if you're drilling down to a citizenship benefit and you're measuring the citizenship based off of that, and you're using that to make comparative analyses, the first thing is I have a problem rating the main benefit of a citizenship based on any type of springboard benefit. Okay, so what do I call springboard benefit? As a reminder, I call it a benefit of one citizenship that gives you access in some way, shape, or form to a third country. Okay, so obviously the most obvious answer or the most obvious example of a springboard benefit is visa-free access. Okay, if I'm an American and I become Portuguese citizenship, then I get the visa-free access of Portuguese citizenship to third countries. Okay, that's a springboard benefit. That's problematic for me to rate that as a primary benefit of a citizenship, because it's not entirely based off of just the actions and the ability of that one country. It's based off of and dependent on and vulnerable to obviously treaties. Okay, third country treaties, and those things change. Okay, what I think forms the basis of the value of a citizenship, as far as at least mobility benefits. Okay, and what I mean by mobility benefits is a benefit that controls or allows you to enter somewhere, stay somewhere, exit somewhere. I think the most important benefit is the core residency rights. Okay, where does that country's citizenship allow you to have immediate highest right of entry and stay? Now, I know that's not that sexy. That's not that exotic, but that's really the most important benefit of a citizenship, in my opinion, and the most robust, right? A country does not need treaties with other countries in order to maintain your ability to enter and live in the first country's territory, right? So I think that's the most important benefit of a citizenship. I think any type of citizenship comparison has to factor that in as, if not one of the main components, the main component. So the core residency rights. Second would be satellite residency rights. What I define as satellite residency rights is rights of residency that one country's citizenship offers you in another country. The most well-known example probably would be the European Union, of course. If you're a citizen of an EU country, you have satellite residency rights in other countries in the European Union. Now, the reason I distinguish between core and satellite residency rights is because the latter, satellite residency rights, are much more vulnerable to change and a lot of other factors. Okay, so obviously your country, if your country is a part of a union that gives you residency rights in other countries, your country could leave the union. The other country that you have residency rights could leave the union. Okay, the union could dissolve. The other country could unlawfully restrict you from taking up residency there. There's a lot more attack vectors to satellite residency rights than core residency rights. Okay, but still, I think, vulnerable as they are to those attack vectors, I still think satellite residency rights are more important than visa-free access if you're actually measuring citizenships, like the strength of citizenships. Um, Couple things that I've thought a lot about, and I'd love to hear from you all, how this should be factored in, if at all, is how to deal with the presence of red flags of negative aspects of a citizenship. Should a citizenship ranking list, a citizenship ranking index, incorporate those drawbacks of those citizenships? So common ones being, citizenship-based taxation, prohibition on renunciation, countries that are subject to international sanctions, prohibition on multiple citizenship. So, for example, citizenship in a country like Singapore that prohibits multiple citizenship. Should they be factored into the list, or should the list just be a list of the benefits, and then kind of you have to evaluate, on a case by case basis what those drawbacks are? I don't have a good answer for it yet. I've been thinking about the question for a while, and I still don't know where I come down on how that should be. So anyway, that's kind of my skeleton for how I think about the issues with so-called passport index lists. We got a lot of people. Okay, Jay's here. Jay wants to speak as well. Okay, so I'm going to open up for some discussion here, and I'm gonna kick off with a question to Patrick, who's kind of been my co-host in a lot of these mobility spaces. So, Patrick, first question, okay, and I know I brought up a lot of issues here, okay, but my first question is, should visa-free access be the basis of a citizenship ranking index?
To answer your question directly, no. Visa-free access should not be the basis for these. And, you know, I think there's a bunch of different ways to look at these lists, and I'm generally against them, and I'll get to why. But the short version is that citizenships provide benefits and obligations on multiple fronts, not just, visa-free is problematic for two reasons. One, it's purely a mobility benefit. It's not, and there's no way to account for economic benefit or um, multilateral organization access. None of that. It's just a mobility benefit. And second of all, it assumes that all countries are the same, which they're not. I know that sounds very rude and imperial of me to say, but it's true. And uh, and also, um, it doesn't properly weigh the constraints of citizenship, and so it doesn't take into account things like citizenship-based taxation or mandatory conscription. And all of those things are different responsibilities to different people. And so, um, people have tried to enhance some of these passport rankings lists by having a composite index. So they account for three or four factors that they subjectively weight and then compile. But again, that doesn't necessarily reflect the value of citizenship to specific people or the obligations that they have. And so, I like to think of like the value of citizenship to kind of be broken down um, by its mobility value, right? And that is that can be broken down even further into like core benefits and satellite benefits. Then there's the economic value. If it provides you access, physical or even digital access to a marketplace that's valuable. Like, having access to the United States economy is a little bit different than having access to the Canadian economy, and both of those are very different than having access to the economy of Bosnia Herzegovina. So, and then the last one, of course, is the responsibility aspect, and it's difficult really to compile that because conscription access or like mandatory conscription in one country can be relatively, straightforward, and you don't see combat, say Switzerland, or it can be one where you have a decent chunk of responsibility, say like in Israel. So And then, you know, in practice, there's really only one country that has citizenship-based taxation, and so anything that accounts for that effectively, penalizes just one country. So, um, all of these things together make it a very complicated scenario. But I'll leave you with this framework, and that is that all of these benefits can change over time. They're dependent on the country or other countries. And so when you look at these, either benefit, mobility, economic access, or you know, responsibilities for that citizenship, consider how they'll change over time. Some things will probably never change, like citizenship-based taxation, but other things might change, like visa-free access. And so, I can dig into some examples later on as the discussion gets further. But I think bucketing these benefits and understanding their value to people it makes you realize how futile it is to rank citizenships, and at the same time, it also helps you with that discussion to say, how is this valuable to me, and why is this not valuable to someone else? Someone's willing to pay $140,000 for a Sierra Leone passport. That value is not that's not valuable to me personally, and understanding that difference, I think, kind of really helps you start that conversation as to why a lot of these ranking systems are, at the end of the day, kind of ridiculous.
Got it. So a couple thoughts. By the way, anybody who wants to speak, cannonball in, just jump in. Okay, you don't have to wait for me to invite you. Couple thoughts, Patrick. So yes, of course, value of a particular citizenship is subjective to the particular person. I don't think that necessarily means that there can't be value in ranking, right? I think with a methodology that makes sense, you can rank the citizenships and then obviously have the caveat. You understand, this is generally speaking, okay, but everybody has, their particular, value on something. The problem comes, when you try to make a tool everything, it becomes nothing. Okay. So I think any sensible ranking of citizenship has to be limited, and it has to be kind of presented to the public in a way that they understand that this is not accounting for all of the important aspects of citizenships, that there are other very important aspects of citizenships that need to be considered. They just don't lend themselves to kind of a ranking list. Okay. So I think there's a few ways of doing this. Okay. I think one could be to try to rank citizenships just based on the mobility aspects. Okay. Just the mobility aspects, where the citizenship allows you to enter, stay, and leave from, okay, and stay for however long, okay, just the mobility aspects, okay, and you could even include springboarding benefits as well, like visa-free access in there. But I would argue that should be weighted less than, of course, the residency rights. So such a ranking would not include, benefits of economic access, okay, or for example, consular assistance, things that might be, just might ramp up the complexity so much if you try to implement them, right? So I could see that possibly being, I think it would be more sensible than the current kind of rankings that are most, the current ranking methodology that kind of rules the day. And then I could see the other way of ranking citizenships in some sort of way where you try to you rank the mobility benefits, okay, and then you try to account for some of the red flags, okay, by giving either giving some sort of negative points for them, okay, or possibly just an asterisk, okay. So identify. So I believe, of course, I'm on the record saying I think the most important downside aspects of citizenship are extraterritorially applied application of law. Okay, so those things that we talked about, CBT, prohibition, renunciation, mandatory conscription. There's not that many, I think, that are generally of interest to a lot of people. Obviously, you can't have a ranking that incorporates literally every aspect of domestic law of every country in the world. But I think you can cover probably the vast majority of the downsides of citizenship in about, I'd say, probably 10 categories, maybe 10 to 12 categories. Okay. And you could have a ranking that ranks the citizenships based off of the mobility aspects and then has an asterisk for the countries that have one of these red flags, one of these extraterritorially applied obligations. Is this Would this system be perfect? No, absolutely not. Far from perfect. Okay. Do I think it'd be better than what's on the market right now? Yeah, I think it would be a lot better. I'm still not sure if the problem with having rankings and indices, in my opinion, is it also gives it sometimes gives a false sense of having consumed information, right? There's studies out there that basically say that even if you tell somebody something and you say, "Look, I don't know if this is the case or not, but this is what I heard." Okay, even with that discounting of the credibility that you give to the person, people are still naturally inclined to over rely on that thing that they heard. So we have a bias towards kind of giving weight and credibility to things that are presented to us as information, even if they're simultaneously presented with a line that attacks their credibility. So that makes me wonder if maybe consumers, and obviously it's free market, everybody can do whatever they want. I'm not saying that people should stop doing their passport rankings, but in terms of from the consumer perspective, from the perspective of the freedom seeking individual, maybe they're better off not actually looking at citizenship rankings. So I'm not sure. I really don't know. I don't have a calcified opinion yet on this. Second question for you, Patrick. Okay, let's say let's say Patrick McFawn, okay, was to come out with the McFawn Citizenship Index. Okay, would the methodology just focus, would you limit yourself just to the mobility benefits of a particular citizenship, or would you try to also incorporate the non-mobility benefits of the citizenship? So economic access, consular assistance, those other types of things that we spoke about.
So the short answer is yes. I would attempt to weight the additional benefits. Consular access is very important, particularly if you're a globally mobile person. There are, a lot of esoteric benefits to multiple citizenships, but I think, which are funny. We've talked about them before. You can play for another country's Olympic team. If you are a citizen of a crown dependency, you can be knighted in a way that a general person cannot be. They're pretty. These are pretty niche benefits. But um, the two things that I think a lot of ranking systems, I guess, I guess I'll start here, and it's like, and it is, half the time we don't know what the rankings are for. Is it for an academic measurement of the strength of a citizenship? Because a lot of the people who assemble them are service providers who offer, you know, additional passport services, or citizenship by investment or residency by investment. Um, and so in that case, whether or not you can obtain the citizenship, I think is an equally important criteria. Where there's certain citizenships that it doesn't matter how hard you try, you're never going to get that citizenship, because there's a naturalization process, you know, on paper that has never been used, um, or there's just strict limits as to who has access to become a citizen, right? So I think that that's also a pretty significant criteria. Um, and then on top of that, I also think, and I think that the negatives of a citizenship are, also not treated the same, right? I think the ability to hold multiple citizenships is pretty key, because the one, as we've talked about, in a perfect world, you have more than one citizenship. Ideally, I think we kind of hovered around three. So if there's a citizenship that's phenomenally great, it is the number one in the world. Let's say, you see some of these rankings that say UAE or Singapore. Well, Singapore doesn't allow for dual citizenship. So how great is that if it forces you to put everything in one basket, right? Um, and then on top of that, I think I think the access is pretty key. So all of these things can factor into a composite, but it also requires one to go back to its foundation and say, what is this list for? Is it a marketing tool, or is it an academic study?
Yeah, I would ideally like it to be not a marketing tool or an academic study, but more of a practical tool, something that somebody can look at and glean some information from. Um, Now, one aspect that I've mentioned before, and I kind of glossed over here, but I think it's really important, is generally the world economy is generally moving more towards cyberspace, right? I don't think we'll ever be 100% in cyberspace. I mean, to the extent we still need physical things and tools and cars and houses, there's still going to be an economy outside of cyberspace. But the general migration, right, of the economy is more towards cyberspace, and I think that um, decreases the value, generally speaking, okay, of economic access to a particular jurisdiction, right? If you were to just, just push to an extreme as a thought experiment, right? If the entire economy, if 100% of the world economy was online, then where you could have access to would matter, would be, much more reliant on kind of where you want to subject yourself to, laws territorially, as well as where you just like spending time, okay, where you want to just park your butt, to sleep at night, right? I think as time goes on, I mean, the mobility access, literally the access of where you actually can go, okay, and stay, and how high how robust that right of access is. I already think it's primary, and I think it's going to become even more primary, right? To the extent that to the extent that that can happen. And so I also have a beef with, citizenship. I don't mean to pick on small countries or city states, but I cannot fathom how a country that has a tiny landmass the size of an island, right? How a citizenship that only gives you highest immediate right of entry and residency, okay, the highest right of residency in a territory that's that small, how that could be a top citizenship in the world, right? Citizenship, a number one or a number five or even a number 10. Okay, so to me, if your country's landmass is a UAE or a Singapore, that's an automatic exclusion for any type of general ranking. Okay, yes, those countries for now have very strong visa-free access to other countries in the world, but these things change, right? And only a cursory, you only need a cursory review of history, just even the last 50, 60 years, to see that today's darling on the nation state stage is tomorrow's pariah, and today's pariah is tomorrow's darling, right? So those things change, okay, rapidly, sometimes fast, sometimes slowly, and with those changes comes changes to the mobility access of those people. Before the Iranian Revolution in 1979, Iranians had pretty easy access to travel wherever they wanted to in the world. There was hundreds of thousands of Iranian students that came to the United States under the Shah to study. It was an easy peasy process for them to apply for a visa, and they came. Okay, then there was a revolution. Okay, not the first, maybe not the last. Okay, and definitely not the first in world history. And overnight, Iran was a pariah state. Okay, almost overnight. Okay, it was a pariah state, and Iranians still to this day, 45 years later, have really really restricted mobility rights. Right. So landmass, in my opinion, is a big factor, okay, and a super underrated factor, okay. I want to go to Patience. Patience has been here waiting patiently, dare I say. Patience, two-part question. What do you think about most of the passport rankings now, okay, which really are, really citizenship rankings? What do you think about them now? Do you think they're sensible? And if they're not sensible, what do you think has to be the basis of a sensible citizenship ranking index?
Well, I think they're bullshit, if you ask me. But I think they omit some of the stuff you guys already talked about. They don't put the individual in the middle of the question. There are parameters, right, that we talked about: the social safety net, the visa-free travel, the landmass, the natural resources, whatever parameters you can put. But then the question, if you wanna ask the question, what is the best citizenship? The question should be really, what is the best citizenship for me, or what is the best citizenship that I can attain, and then you have a set of input data that are about you. So what is your profile? What citizenship do you already hold? What languages you speak? If we're thinking about naturalization coming, a set of parameters that those rankings never talk about. Building a citizenship portfolio. If I'm already an EU citizen, then I'm putting less emphasis on EU citizenship and the Springboard benefits that come with it. If visa-free travel is the thing that I'm targeting on, then I'll be putting more focus on there. So they don't really, like, the software engineer part of me says, okay, there's a function there that spits you an output, but there's also a lot of input. And as long as we don't talk about the inputs, the individual, we'll never get a viable output. We can try to compare, but it's never going to answer the question properly for the individual. So what I end up doing is I end up not looking at these, to be honest. And like you said, small landlocked countries that were only great for the past 30 years are somehow every year the best citizenship in the world. So sure. And they also happen to just either rely on natural resources or rely on things like a financial industry, things that can shift over time. So yeah, I think they're pretty BS.
Patience, what if we take away the input aspect? What if we take it away and we just say, hey, we just want to put forth a citizenship ranking index that has at least a sensible function and a sensible output from that function, and everybody is responsible for kind of evaluating their own input, right? Would that be possible? And I mean, especially if the methodology was crystal clear, okay, if it was really detailed, would that be possible, so that everybody can kind of be responsible for looking at the list and weighting or counterweighting accordingly based off of their own preferences and how they might deviate from the methodology?
I guess it would. It's so complex because you have so many parameters that like, for example, I've been going back and forth with the ranking things that are attainable, right? And for example, if you think just about the citizenship-based taxation aspect of the American citizenship, for some people it's something that is really that is really hurting their financial planning. For other people, it's not the case at all. So it's really a complex topic. So some people rely on tax treaties. Some people only have U.S. source income. Some people are accidental Americans. It's such a complex question to ask. I like, one of the parameters that I would personally, in my case, try to put more emphasis in, if I had to give some, I don't know an English word for that, but like some weight to the parameter, it would be, is it actually a citizenship that you can attain, that you can reach? And I think people often don't ask themselves those questions. They look at these as shiny objects, instead of looking at what is actually sensible in, because you have a finite amount of time, you have a finite amount of resources and of effort you would put into that. It gets old, like getting to chase naturalization and all of that gets old. So I would say whatever you can achieve should have some weight in the ranking.
Do you think that's really necessary, though? Because, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here. To the extent that people rely on citizenship rankings or passport rankings for actual planning, I don't think they go to the list and start at the list, okay, and then start looking at the top down and say, oh, hey, this one looks good, this one looks good. I don't think that happens as much as first people kind of looking at what's accessible to them or what they think is accessible to them, and then going to the list. You see what I'm saying? And if it's the latter, right, then a citizenship ranking without reference to how easily attainable the citizenship is could still be of value, right? So, for example, let's say, an American who wants a second citizenship by CBI, they don't think they qualify for any type of citizenship by descent. They don't want to spend lots of physical presence elsewhere. Okay, they're looking at CBIs. Okay, let's say they've narrowed it down to 8 CBIs in the world. Okay, they can afford all 8. Okay, then they go to the list, okay, and start evaluating kind of the benefits, that they think that this could provide for them. I think that could still be of value. Don't you think, Patience?
I think that's fair. There is, so would you have a look at the ranking and then figure out and then filter out the ones that I can achieve and look at the rank of the ones that I can achieve? Or would you go the other way, which is the one that is more achievable for me, and for me this one should be ranked higher? It's so personal. It's like so hard to answer.
Right. Yeah. See, the thing is, Patience, if you try to incorporate, so yes, you raise a great point, and Patrick raised it too. I don't want to sound like I'm giving short shrift to the issue of the accessibility of the citizenships. That's huge. As a practical matter, that's the most important aspect as for a person that's deciding that they want to get a second or third citizenship. I just don't, with the complexity, and who knows, maybe I'm thinking with my pre-AI, mind. Okay, maybe with AI, this is totally more, doable now. But what I think is with the complexity of how difficult it is to evaluate the path to citizenship in all of these countries, right? So just without the input of the person of what citizenship the applicant is coming from. So even before we add that in, just the difficulty of the path to citizenship, especially when we get past headline, terms like 2 years until naturalization, before we even get to actually what happens on the ground, right? I think it would be so unwieldy. I think, it would be so unwieldy to try to incorporate that into a citizenship ranking, that I don't know. I just don't think it would be doable in a way that's functional. But again, I might be looking at this with the bias of somebody who's had the majority of my career before AI.
Hi. So, Parviz, I'm going to second that as a person who is probably much younger than you. That I don't really think that the accessibility of a citizenship, that its place is in passport rankings, because when you go and you look at one of these rankings, it's to tell you what the benefits and in some cases the drawbacks of these citizenships are. I feel like at that point, when we're talking about how difficult it is to get that at that point that's your responsibility to go and do that research for yourself once you decide which ones you think would work. But if you're going to incorporate it, like that's not really a benefit of having the citizenship or a cost of having it. It's a cost to get it, right? And that's, I would say, fundamentally different. Additionally, when we're talking about what these rankings are for, we also have to think about who this is going to be for, because there are some folks, maybe in countries like Iran, that want maybe a citizenship that can actually get them more visa-free access to various countries. But then somebody from the US might not care about that so much because they already have access to all of these, to the vast majority of the world. So because most of these are made by immigration and citizenship consultants or practitioners, I would say that potentially because of the clientele and the selling point of visa-free access, that's probably why it predominates in these rankings. I would look maybe as a guide to how to make how to make a ranking, not that I think it's a great ranking, the Nomad Passport Index. What do you think, Parviz?
Yeah, so of course, I agree with the first part of what you said, which is in effect agreeing with me. I think the accessibility is an extremely important issue, but it's separate. In fact, it might be the most important issue for the person trying to seek a second citizenship. But I don't know that I don't think that it has the place in the ranking, at least not yet. Um, to your second point, Jay, okay, the reason that visa-free access was, formed the basis of the first passport index list and continues to predominate is because it's the most easily measurable. Okay, it's just information that was lifted from the International Air Transport Association, the IATA. Okay, which basically just has a platform that shows which citizens of which country can go visa-free to other countries. Okay, because this is a trade association for airlines, to make sure that they don't let somebody board that doesn't have visa-free access and then get dinged with a $5,000 fine when they're turned away at the destination. That's it. Okay. There's no the Nomad Index, at least recently. Yes, they're trying to actually incorporate some other methodology, which I still disagree with. But hats off for them to at least trying to move away from that visa-free access. The visa-free access only is just pure laziness. It's just pure lifting information from a trade association and throwing it as a list, as if it's some sort of useful information or functional. Okay, it's that's why the visa-free access was the big formed the beginning of the basis of these lists. And it's also something I think it's more palatable for the average person who doesn't know anything about citizenship, passport. They don't know, they don't understand anything about it. I think can still understand the concept that, hey, with this citizenship that, with this passport that shows this citizenship, I can get into this place visa free. So I think it's just pure naked marketing at the expense of actually putting something forth that's useful. And in fact, I think it's worse than doing nothing, actually, because I think crap info that's put forth as information is actually worse than not having put out the list to begin with, because people read that, people consume that, they think they've learned something, and whether they think it or not, what they read is incorporating into their decision making. And then, I mean, I haven't even spoken about journalists yet. Okay, oh my God, the journalists who cover citizenship, multiple citizenship, immigration, just are horrible, horrific. Okay, no vetting. Okay, there's so many good practitioners out there, lawyers and others that could actually talk to talk them through this stuff. They don't check with them, and they just publish crap, and a lot of it is based off of these lists. So yeah. So Jay, sorry, did you have I may have gotten a little bit off track there. So yes, I agree with your first point, of course, and then the second point is that's the reason that visa-free access formed the basis of these lists. And then what was the last? Did you have a question at the end of there, Jay?
I don't think I did, but I wanted to add that when you talk about the landmass, I think that is really important. When you see some of these rankings, they rank very tiny Caribbean countries above larger countries that maybe not necessarily are going to have all the same visa-free travel access, but you're going to get a much greater climate diversity and much more different places that you can choose to live in. Like, let's say Turkey and Barbados, right? Barbados is one place. I've heard it's quite nice, but it's one very small, isolated, maybe not isolated, island in the Caribbean that has one climate, and either you like it or you don't. It's tropical, nice beaches, but Turkey has lots of different climates and lots of different places to live, and it's a huge country to explore, and that I think should count for something.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, look, in a worst case scenario, right? Let's imagine you're a citizen of a country that just becomes a total pariah, okay? And you have either no access to other countries or very difficult access to other countries. When you're talking about your quality of life, of where you can live and stay, would you rather be a place like Turkey or Mexico, huge country with lots of, biodiversity, all kinds of different cities, little towns to big cosmopolitan cities, the United States, Spain, or would you rather be, a Singapore or a Barbados or something like that? I think that's a huge factor, a huge consideration. That's just, very not often considered or not considered enough, and I think part of the reason that that's not considered is because, to Patience's point, there's some of these small countries that have only kind of been doing well for the last 30, 40, 50 years, and people don't think of they don't think of a country's position in the world as being a dynamic thing. Okay, they think of it as like a snapshot. Okay, like it's static. It ain't. It's not static. Okay, these things are always changing, and this is part of the reason that I advocate for the multiple citizenship snowshoe. Okay, you want to have a snowshoe. Okay, pressure, diffused pressure. Okay, across potentially across multiple countries. Okay, so that if one country falls through, you can exert weight, divert weight to other countries. Okay, if you're dealing with a tiny little country with a tiny landmass, right, and that country falls out in disfavor, or there's a revolution, you're not going to be very happy, right, with that having been your only citizenship and the only place that you can have again, highest immediate right of entry and residence. So yeah. Okay, we got Alex here. Alex is joining. Welcome, Alex. Whenever you want, just feel free to throw yourself in. Patience, you're a programmer, or you were a programmer. Does the rise in AI make it a lot more plausible to actually be able to incorporate all of these extremely nuanced, information dense, law dense factors into a citizenship ranking? Like does it seriously help it, do you think, or is it kind of does the rise of AI only give a marginal benefit in trying to achieve such a task?
Yeah, for sure. I think we could take a stab at it. We'd have to figure out the weighting ourselves. I don't think it's too difficult in terms of implementation. There's so many parameters. We'd have to think about it because it's so complex. I was thinking about like one of the things we haven't really talked about is like this ability to, like, all of the family Springboard benefits, the ability to sponsor people and things like that. All of these parameters would have to be compiled, given a weight, and then we see what happened. We see what's the result. It's just math, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I would guess, look, if I'm going to actually look at a citizenship ranking, let's say I'm a consumer, I'm going to look at a ranking and try to, trust what I'm reading in any way, shape, or form. I'd want the methodology to be totally transparent, right? So if this is a software program, then, open source, they can see exactly how the thing is being, programmed, exactly what weight is being given, right? And then people can argue at the margins, right? You can always, I have no problem if there's a citizenship ranking, right, that's totally, open, open methodology, okay, crystal clear methodology, and someone comes in and says, yeah, you know what, I have a beef with this ranking because I think you gave too much weight to satellite residency rights. Okay, I think visa-free access should be weighted, more than satellite, residency rights. Okay, fine. Then the person can take whatever the program is and tweak accordingly and make their offshoot of the ranking for themselves. I think that would be cool. I think that would actually be useful. That could actually help people. As a marketing tool, I don't know how maybe the visa-free access passport rankings would still rule just because they're simple and easy to look at. I think the average consumer likes just looking at a list. Okay, here's a number. I see a list from 100 to 210, or 1 to 210, and I see countries and I see a ranking. That's certainly more attractive. Certainly more easy, right, to look at. But obviously, maybe not as instructive. Go ahead, Patience.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest. I think, and that's one of the biggest drawback of those listings. It's that they don't really move the needle for people. Either you're in a situation where you have a really. I'm going to talk about travel document. I'm not going to talk about the citizenship, but they are passport ranking. That's how they name them. So either you're going to look at your passport, you'll notice that your passport ranking is pretty bad, and it's not going to do anything for you. It's not like it's advising you what's the best course of action for you to correct that. And on the other hand, if you have a really good travel document, let's say like a tier A EU passport, you're probably going to be top 20, top 30. And you're going to look at that and you're like, oh, I'm done. I'm all good. I don't need to do anything. I'm already better than 80% of the people over the world. So I don't need to really. So regardless of your situation, it doesn't help you improve your passport portfolio. It's just there. It's just consumption of news article, either by the BBC or by like whatever newspaper in the UAE or whatever. It's noise.
Here's my other theory. I think that part of what these rankings do is kind of help people who've already decided to get a CBI to backwards kind of justify, their decision, right? Everybody likes to feel, nobody wants to have buyer's remorse. Everybody likes to purchase something and then feel good about the purchase, right? Especially if it's pricey, right? So especially, passport rankings that are issued by CBI consultancies, right? If you got 12 CBIs to sell, right? And you sell it, then the person buys it, they get the citizenship and the passport, and then they can kind of look at the rankings and feel a little bit more, I don't know, feel good about themselves. Like, oh yeah, I got this passport, and this is number 24 on the rankings.
Yep. If you look at the news, if you look at some of the news from some of the newspaper in St. Kitts, or you look at like the actual websites of the citizenship by investment units, they will list all of the diplomatic effort that they're doing in order to improve that score. So even them, they know that score matters because 157 is better than 147. So they would go and sign visa-free agreement with some random countries over the world in order to improve that score, but they will never, for some individuals, for some countries that matter, they know they have no path to improvement. And this is actually shown as well in the pressure they're getting from the EU, which is their main marketing tool, the Schengen visa access. But they know they want to get Canada back. They know they'll never get the US. They know and people are okay buying the citizenship for that, as long as that number, the visa-free travel number, is in the 150. So they're like fighting for that number, which is, doesn't change anything.
Well, I think, hey guys, I don't know if you've talked about this already, but one important factor of rankings is you improve what you measure. So the reason St. Kitts and other governments focus on this is because that's what people are measuring. And if other things were measured, you improve what you measure. So it'd be interesting if there could be some kind of strategic ranking that would encourage governments to improve the things that matter most, as opposed to just absolute number of countries, in particular ones people don't care about, and transition them to countries that are valuable or settlement rights or things like that as an area of focus.
Yeah, I think I'm not saying it's easy, but I think the most accessible benefit that countries could try to focus on that would actually be a needle mover is increased settlement rights in third-party countries, right? So, that's a benefit that really catches my attention, the attention of a lot of practitioners, right? And probably the reason that the EU citizenships are as valued as they are, right? Now, EU citizenship is kind of the gold standard as far as having settlement and work rights in third-party countries. But there's also a lesser level. There's kind of an intermediate level, right, between visa-free access and unrestricted right of residency and working, and that's basically preferred access, right? So particular, for example, e-treaty visas, right, to the United States, right? If you're a citizen of a country that's a part of the e-treaty, right, with the United States, then you have access to a residence by investment that people that are citizens of countries that are not part of the treaty don't have access to, right? That's something, that those are benefits that can be negotiated on a bilateral basis without a country having to go through the huge multi-year, if not multi-decade, process of creating a union, okay, like a full union, like the CTA or the European Union. I think that's a needle mover. And while that doesn't obviously offer core residency rights, it offers satellite residency rights, which people care about. I mean, that's valuable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm gonna
What
jump in
are
here
some
because I
other
have.
ones like the e-treaty visa that you can think of?
There's a treaty between the United States and Thailand for for certain businesses, something like that for Americans. I've read about it, never had to deal with it. There's the compact association, so like Palau, residents can work in, sorry, citizens can work in the United States. They still have to apply for a work permit, an I-765, but they don't have to go through the rigmarole of actually finding a basis for the work permit. What are other ones?
Working
Maybe
holiday
the
one.
working holiday.
Yeah, that's a good
That's
one. Yeah,
probably one
exactly.
of the most
Yeah, that's a good one.
underrated
Yeah,
ones.
absolutely, the
I
working
think
holiday.
Canada
Go ahead.
has some of the best working holiday agreements where most people under 30, even 35, can work all around the world, Australia, Ireland, Chile, South Korea, for a year or two. So that might be one of the most underrated benefits, especially because it can get you in the door for normal immigration.
Great point. Yeah, sorry, I was talking over you there. Absolutely, the working holiday visas for Commonwealth countries. Somebody else was trying to speak. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna chime in here. Also with Canada, the United Kingdom, which is funny because if you wanted to be a ski instructor, you could literally just go between Canada and Australia and chase the seasons for a couple of years under that arrangement between the hemispheres. I was going to add, there's a phenomenon that's happened in the last post-COVID that kind of explores those secondary residency rights versus right of first residency, which I think is really illuminating. Um, every year, I believe it's IMI, they either publish it or they republish it, and it is the number of millionaires plus and minus by country where they change their domicile. And the one country that has consistently gotten a lot of millionaires in the last 5 years has been Italy, despite Italy being a pretty onerous place to live from a tax perspective. And it's solely because they're cashing out on the Italian lifestyle. It is the right of first residency, and people are saying, hey, even though it might not be financially advantageous, it's a lifestyle I'm willing to pay for, and they move there. But for people who are not millionaires, for example, a lot of people in Latin America who had Italian ancestors prior to the recent changes of Italian citizenship by descent, a good chunk of them would get their Italian citizenship and then never even go to Italy. They would use that for a visa to access the United States because suddenly they're getting that access on behalf of an EU citizenship and not a Brazilian citizenship. And so it kind of goes back to that question of like, who is this for, and what do you, not to sound too much like a therapist, but like, what do you want to do with your life? And some people want the lifestyle, and some people want the economic access. And in both of those examples I used, it's essentially the basis of it is the citizenship of the same country. So, it kind of goes to show you how those things have this carousel of value to different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just remembered one of the biggest temporary residency springboard benefits, which is the TN visa for Canadians to be able to access the United States. That's a huge benefit for Canadians. It's its own residency category. And then, we've kind of been talking, Alex, so far about actually like the substantive benefit of, residency or right to work in a third country provided by citizenship in a second country. But there's also this underrated aspect of different paths to be able to get the same residency, right? United States, which famously has a Byzantine, vicitudinal immigration system, we have very strict rules on how you can apply and where you can apply from physically, where you can have to be physically to apply for certain types of visas and statuses. Canadians have advantaged access actually to a lot of those residencies, right? Whereas for the majority of almost the rest of the world, you have to apply for a visa, come into the country, and then if you're in the country and you want to transfer, change status, you have to go through a certain process, a change of status. Whereas Canadians can actually come through as tourists and then change their status inside the United States without a presumption of having had fraudulent immigrant intent. So it's not just the Canadians. I'm just going to pick on the Canadian example because it's easy. It's one I can riff off the top of my head. It's not just that Canadians have access to more types of visas in the United States. It's also literally they can get to the types of visas and residencies that we have through more paths, basically easier paths for them than the vast majority of the world. So that's another important springboard benefit that's kind of underrated, that countries could, obviously different countries, have different abilities to negotiate their treaties, but these are certainly things that are accessible to countries without constructing a whole union like the European Union.
Are there examples of countries that have added any of these recently?
By these, you mean what I just referred to? So third country springboard benefits, residency benefits?
Yeah, any meaningful benefit that can be bilaterally negotiated quickly. Or even e-visas, I think it's pretty rare a new e-country is added, right?
I think I'm not 100% sure how this is going to work, or if this is going to be part of this country's entry, but Panama recently entered Mercosur as an associated state. And over the next few years, it might become clear, what third country residency rights Panamanian citizens are going to get from this, if any, because all the other countries that are associated members of Mercosur, they get satellite residency benefits in all the other countries except sometimes Chile.
Alex, I can't.
Yeah, that's a great example. I was just going to say that's a great example because I believe Mercosur might be one of the few unions that have expanded in recent years. Most of them have been relatively straightforward. The EU, slowly but surely. A little more esoteric example would be ECOWAS, and they've had a few countries fall out of it. So I actually think I can point to more examples of fading benefits as opposed to expanding benefits with regards to secondary residency rights.
Alex, I can't think off the top of my head of a recent addition to third country residency rights, short of being in a union. They're out there. I just can't think of some off the top of my head.
Oh, I can think of one that actually did recently just happen. I'm pretty sure Uruguay and Brazil bilaterally negotiated to allow each of the citizens to immediately become permanent residents in each other's countries and not just temporary like the Mercosur agreement and envisages.
Changes in the law. Sorry, I'm in Argentina. I've got both American and Israeli passport. Well, passport, no, because I don't live in Israel. They changed the law. Brazil changed the law when Mr. Lula decided to put these visas back. And the waiver on that, the Senate passed because the Senate, they're having a huge drop in tourism in Brazil. It's terrible because of this. So, and their visa system doesn't work. So even if you're a permanent resident in Argentina, in Uruguay, in Paraguay, never mind the associate countries of Chile and Peru and all that, if you have a permanent residency, you are not getting into Brazil without that visa. And that's just how it is. And that's the change that just came in a couple of weeks ago. Plus, if that's not bad enough, you can come in by going through Paraguay and crossing at Ciudad del Este, but when you go up to the next town, to Cascavel, you may get stopped and turned around. and fined. And then it goes beyond that. Do you have a problem with Caputo and Milei making threats all the time with North America to leave Mercosur? I don't think it's going to happen. I'm almost sure it's not going to happen. But those second residency rights is getting a lot more tricky. Now, will the Brazil visa thing stick the way it is? I'm not sure that it will. But for example, now permanent residents of Brazil, this has not happened yet, coming to Argentina. They want to change the law in Argentina too, that permanent residents of Brazil that are not Brazilian citizens cannot just go waltzing into Argentina. I mean, sure, there are ways to do it, but I'm talking legally now. And I think we're going to be seeing more of that. So sorry for butting in, but since I'm here, I thought you might like to hear what's going on with that.
Thanks, David. Yeah, thanks for adding. Anybody can talk. That's how we do it here. Anybody can jump right in. That's a great example of the volatility of Springboard mobility benefits, right? They're subject to agreement and diplomatic relations between two countries. And David, you're coming in way late here. The beginning of this discussion, we were kind of all dunking on the uselessness of modern passport strength rankings because the majority of them are based off of visa-free access, which is a springboard benefit. It's vulnerable. It's not the most important aspect of a citizenship, and it's vulnerable to volatility. So yeah, thank you for that update. That was good info.
Yeah. By the way, there's another thing that you need to be careful of in Brazil on citizenship, and that's citizenship taxation. The government is broke in Brazil. I mean, actually, even though in Argentina right now it's the most expensive place in the world practically to live at the moment, everything is distorted here. But Brazil in the long term, I'm looking in the long term, has got a case of the shorts. I mean, they're spending way too much money, and they're doing everything they can now to start citizenship taxation. So there are some loopholes. There are lawyers that deal with it, but the amount of time you're there, very similar to what Spain is trying to do with the 183 days. And a lot of countries are really getting, including Israel now, thanks to the United States, that they're measuring time that you get to keep the passport against taxation. But what they're really trying to do is to get the citizenship taxation. So I would be a little bit careful. It's a great passport, the Brazilian passport. It's terrific. Russia, China, all these places. But I'll get more information on the taxing. It's a rather tricky calculation.
There you go. One of the major red flags of second citizenship-based taxation, or potential looming citizenship-based taxation. Good intel. Okay, we got a bunch more listeners here. So just as a reminder to anybody, this is a mobility space. We're talking about dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty. Today, we're talking about passport strength rankings, BS or legitimate. Anybody can speak. So if you have something to say, or if you disagree, come forth and let us know. Just jump in, send me a request. I'll approve it right away. Okay, so Alex, what do you think about current passport strength rankings? Are they mostly sensible or not? And if they're not sensible, what do you think is the big issue with them? How should they be done, if they should exist at all?
Yeah, I would say that they're not very useful. I would agree with, I didn't hear the first half of the conversation, but I can guess what it was, that the things they're measuring are very not useful for the average person. If you get one more country in Africa or one more island in the Pacific, that you're unlikely to go to either of these places, that doesn't really matter too much. And better to focus on the things that most people actually care about, which I think increasingly it's going to be, do you have to fill out some visa light, some ETA, ESTA, whatever the given country calls it. So things like that I think will be increasingly useful, because I suspect a lot of people are going to get surprised at the airport going forwards when the airline asks them, oh, you filled out your ETA, ESTA, whatever, and they're like, what's that? Because I've been traveling to Europe my whole life and I never needed that. And they're traveling with a friend that has an EU passport, and their EU passport friend gets to go on the plane, and they don't get to go on the plane because they didn't get their visa light approved in time. So I think things like that will matter. And then working holiday, I think, is hugely underrated. I saw someone who was talking about birth tourism, and that some of their preferred countries have working holiday rights, because that's a huge advantage both for immigration purposes. If you want to get your foot in the door, you go over on a working holiday, get a job, meet some people, and they can later sponsor you, or you can find another way to extend your time. Often the working holiday time will count towards naturalization time as well, because you're there on a legitimate purpose. It's not student visas, usually they don't count fully or at all, but usually working holidays count. So I think those two are big. Unions are useful, but a little hard because they're subjective. For some people, CARICOM might be extremely useful. For other people, it's like, what's the point? Same thing with Mercosur. I don't think Mercosur is very useful because none of those countries are particularly hard to get residency in. And given often high tax rates, most people often don't want to get residency in there. If it means tax residency, they're fine to spend 3 to 5 months a year. So those are some of my thoughts off the top of my head.
If I can push back on that just a little bit, the reason I defend Mercosur is, again, looking at trends. I would say, yes, you're absolutely right. Of course, if you do Uruguay, if you do Paraguay, you don't have to worry much about taxes. The other countries, yes. But because of the volatility in Europe and all the rearmaments and conscription stuff coming up in Europe, and very, very onerous laws, like in Spain with the banking situation, the Southern Cone right now is in an advantageous situation simply because of its location. So what I tell people is that, go to Paraguay, pay the extra money, get yourself a residency card, because number one, you don't have the taxes. Number two, if you do it properly, and yes, it can still be done properly, you don't have a residency requirement. If you're in Brazil, if you're in Argentina, and you are on temporary residency, right? You must spend 180 days in those countries or you lose it. It's no ifs, ands, or buts. They are pretty serious about it. Before they weren't. Before in Argentina, you could show up just like in Paraguay, once a year or whatever. It used to be I think it used to be 3 years in Paraguay. It may still be. They may be changing it to once a year. That's only with permanent residency now. And as far as birth tourism goes, I can tell you right now that aside from what Trump is doing, what they're doing in Brazil and Argentina is they're saying, okay, you want to have a baby here? Fine, you have a baby. The baby and the mother, or if it's two parents that came in because of the Russians, the baby gets the citizenship, but you have to go through the entire process, including a very, very long residency. There's a lot of pressure on that right now. The reason there's so much pressure in Argentina, too many Bolivians coming in, because Bolivians, which is an interesting residency situation, by the way, is having economic concerns. And so it's a way of saying, well, we don't want you, without saying we want Europeans, which they do say. So that's how I look at it. As far as the Henley ranking, well, yeah, if you're going after HNI or you want to promote a new country, and Henley has the granddaddy, so they have the program for themselves, that's when rankings. But most people want a passport so they can stay, work, and have access to countries in a certain region. That's why I don't think that the Henley list, it's nice to know, but I don't think it's applicable, except for a couple of very narrow subsets. That's just my opinion.
Gotcha. I don't think you actually were disagreeing with Alex. I think Alex's point was that the Springboard benefits, specifically Springboard benefits provided by Mercosur, he doesn't value them that much because they're not that strong, and also alternatively, it's not that hard to get residency in a lot of those countries. I don't think he was not attacking, but I don't think Alex's comment was so much on the value of having residency in a Southern Cone country. I agree with what you said, David, about the value, and I guess I'm speaking too much for Alex. He can speak for himself, but I think Alex would probably also agree. I think he was talking about the Springboard benefits from Mercosur, not discounting their value.
No, there's a lot of it. But see, for me, for example, I've got American citizenship and I have Israeli citizenship, although I have to fight to get my passport back because they retroactively put the residency requirement back in so that real Israelis, not ones that took it by coming over and getting it, they want to get visa-free. They don't want a bunch of Russians coming to the U.S. It's the usual nonsense. But Mercosur has free access into Russia and to a lot of countries. that the U.S. doesn't have free access into. So if you're planning on spending a lot of time in Russia or spending a lot of time in those places, certainly there's a value to the Mercosur thing. And as I say, it's far away from the bombs. And if you're in the right countries, they don't bother you for taxes, and that's an important thing. It's interesting that Panama may get entry into Mercosur. Are they getting entry into Mercosur or associate membership of Mercosur? It's a little bit different. Chile has associate membership, so does Peru. But remember, Peru not only has associate membership, but they have this whole what do you call that thing? The Aegean thing, the Pacific, the Asian Pacific Rim. So they have very easy access into China and Australia. So okay, well. All right. Well, thanks for having me, and I'll start coming to more of these things. I heard about you guys from the exit strategy guys, so I just came in to say hello.
All right. No, thanks for joining, David, and definitely join us. We're going to do 50 of these this year. We're only on number 14, so Mondays and Thursdays.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, I'm doing a little bit of this stuff down here. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Alex. I followed you, so
So, just to add another point here, when we think about residency rights in Mercosur or Mercosur, depending on which country you're thinking about, but when we think about that, it's best to understand the context that countries that are in the Southern Cone are, to some extent, Argentina especially, looking to keep out people from countries that they view as undesirable. And that includes sometimes certain African countries, sometimes, Bolivians, sometimes, right, people from certain Arabic countries or Russians. So the limits that they impose and the restrictions that they impose on residency rights for countries, especially outside of Mercosur, seems to be increasing to some extent. So those springboard benefits of being inside that bubble might increase over time.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand. Can you repeat?
The springboard benefits of being in Mercosur, I think, are going to increase because certain countries, especially Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, they are in a period of time where they're at a point in their development path that they're starting to think about keeping others out rather than letting others in. Exclusionary based immigration system tactics, more like the US, rather than countries that are pretty much open to everyone. So being inside that union is probably going to get more valuable over the next few decades, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure that being more exclusionary to nationalities that Mercosur countries consider less desirable necessarily means the springboard benefits within Mercosur are going to increase. But I would certainly consider it to be kind of a prerequisite for it to be politically palatable for a lot of people in those countries, to have more springboard benefits, right? Like if you're going to increase the intra-block access, right? It's more palatable, if you also say, hey, not anybody can just waltz into this block and pick up, residency and be able to go every which way. But yeah, we'll have to see.
I think one of my takeaways from this conversation is that it would be good to have lists to encourage countries to go in a better direction. I think the Nomad Capitalist list got some coverage when it launched originally. I don't know if they paid for the coverage or how exactly they got it, but it was because it deviated from your traditional Henley type list, where it wasn't just ranking countries solely by visa-free access. They added in a little bit more of other rankings, which pushed up less traditional passports towards the top of the list. And that kind of got people talking about which passports are really the best. It might be cool if there was another list that could encourage the Springboard and satellite benefits to get countries looking into it. Because if Panama can join Mercosur, why couldn't some Caribbean CBI join Mercosur? Or Mexico join Mercosur? Or even why can't Canada join Mercosur? So I think there's potential for countries to work on expanding their attractiveness because we have this simultaneous trend where immigration is needed more than ever due to welfare state demographic issues. On the other hand, everyone's getting stricter than ever. So one solution could be to try to increase your standards, but make it more attractive. It's really hard to get in, but if you get this passport, you're going to have the best Springboard benefits, really good visa free, and a bunch of other non-tangible benefits, consular and others. And that could be a cool trend that countries could work towards as they compete for top talent.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're an hour and 24 minutes in. We got Alex, we got Patrick, we got Jay, Robert, we got Patience, Forma, Dihod.
I'll close that. Well, if we're going towards the wrap up, I have a last thought or theme. But like since we've ranked all of these, or we've gone through the different aspects of how different citizenships can be ranked, I wonder if that's the future of quote unquote passport rankings, which should be citizenship rankings. And that is it not just one ranking? Is it a series of 12 based on a bunch of factors? You know, do you rank citizenships based on mobility? In one cut, you look at the mobility axis, this core mobility access. The second one is satellite mobility access. Third one is just like a human development fund or human development index countries versus like a livability index. And you can combine these different views into these citizenships in a way that allow you to make it valuable to you. I think that's my own personal take. It's a half-baked idea, but it's essentially saying that a citizenship ranking could work, but it would require multiple different lenses, and so it wouldn't actually be one index. It wouldn't be a composite index. It would just be separate views into the same source of information.
I'm evolving in my views, but I think if I had to make a citizenship index, I think I would basically make three major categories. Okay, so core mobility benefits, number one. Okay, so where does it allow the person highest right of entry and residency? Okay, second category, roughly, Springboard mobility benefits. Okay, so first and foremost within that would be satellite residency rights, and then of course, friendlier consulate springboards, and then of course visa-free access. Third category, which I may or may not have, not sure, would be non-mobility benefits. Okay, so access to markets, consular assistance, benefits of a citizenship for shielding from defamation lawsuits, for example. That's a benefit of U.S. citizenship for people who have libel judgments against them from a country that has a standard of free speech that's less than the American First Amendment. So third category, non-mobility benefits of a citizenship, right? I think the way I would incorporate the drawbacks would be through kind of an asterisk system, right? So still low tech. I think the way I would do it, basically, I would probably lay out what I consider to be the 8 to 12, let's call it, red flags of second citizenship that are most common to the most number of people. So top 4 obviously has to be CBT, prohibition on renunciation, mandatory military service, and subject to broad sanctions, basically, right? Those are, I think, the top 4. And then there's others, that are kind of either less impactful or fewer countries have them. I'd probably just have an asterisks or multiple asterisks next to each country in the list to basically flag that the country's citizenship has this type of drawback. I don't think I would incorporate the ease of getting the citizenship, because I think it adds too much complexity, and so much of that component is actually based off of who you are. Okay, so the input, as Patience said. So if I were to make an index, it's not a program, but just has a methodology, I think that's the way I would do it. Okay, three major categories. Obviously, within each category, there'd be some subcategories, and obviously, I'd have to decide what weight to give to each one. But first would be core mobility benefits. Second would be springboard mobility benefits. Third would be non-mobility benefits of the citizenship. And then an asterisk system for countries that have one of the, or more of the 8 to 12, most important second red flags of citizenship. Oh, and sorry, within visa-free access. So visa-free access would fit in the second category, of course, as a springboard benefit. Of course, the access has to be weighted based off of the desirability of the destination. So visa-free access to the United States would not be weighted as much as visa-free access to Gambia or Afghanistan.
When should we expect the index to come out?
This is just a conversation for now, my man, but you never know.
Yeah, that's a very good idea, Parviz, because ranking visa-free access to the U.S. at the same level as Gambia is absolutely absurd on its face, but that number does go up.
Yeah, I think everybody here agrees. I think it's not controversial at all that visa-free access to a country like the UK or the United States or the Schengen zone just cannot be given the same weight as to any of these small countries that. And again, like Patrick said, we're not picking on any countries. It's just a pure function of how desirable the market thinks it is to travel to those countries. People care more about visa-free access to Europe, the UK, and the United States. And any sensible ranking, the component of which is visa-free access, has to reflect that.
As well as the type of visa-free access and the duration of said visa-free access. And many factors, yeah.
Absolutely. ETIAS, we have ETIAS supposedly, coming in late 2026. Okay, so this is the electronic travel authorization system for Americans as well as other citizens that have visa-free access to Europe now to be able to have visa-free access. One of the countries in ETIAS, one of the questions that's anticipated being asked about in ETIAS is previous criminal convictions. Anybody who has a previous criminal conviction that's visited the United States or applied for a residence in the United States knows how big deal that is. Americans, we've been blissfully ignorant, because we most of our lives we've been used to just showing up, not having to answer any questions about previous criminal conviction, not have to file a damn thing before going to the airport. And I don't know if ETIAS is going to come out in 2026. It's been pushed back for years and years. But eventually, ETIAS is going to be implemented. One of the questions is past criminal record. And we touched on this a little bit in the last mobility spaces. Over 50 million Americans are estimated to have at least a misdemeanor or felony conviction. That's not even including arrests that didn't result in a conviction. Maybe the first few years, these people are not going to be dealing with exclusions and denials from ETIAS based off of the criminal conviction. But I believe that when a government collects information, it's just a matter of time until it's used against you, basically. So, we're in 2025 right now. If ETIAS, let's say best case scenario, is implemented at the end of 2026, maybe we go 3 years, maybe we go until 2029, where the information about criminal conviction is collected, but nothing is done with it. But I think eventually, possibly as soon as 2029, 2030, Americans are going to start being excluded from Europe based off of those criminal convictions, as well as possibly, controversial figures that say, unpopular things. So speech-based exclusion. It's coming to a town near you. It's just a matter of when. And as I tweeted before, and I think a few people here kind of piggybacked on that as well. The more that we move from visa-free to what I call visa-light, which means some sort of electronic travel authorization, the more the value of second and third citizenship rises, because it's not generally subject to the exclusions that people are going to experience with electronic travel authorizations, right? So this trend of moving from visa-free to visa-light increases the value of citizenship, in my opinion, and the value of second, third, fourth citizenship. There's some Americans. So, we have 50 million Americans estimated that have misdemeanor or felony conviction. I deal with some of those, tiny percentage of those, to help them find a solution, including, challenging and updating their FBI background check. But more and more, I mean, there's going to be some wealthy Americans who have a criminal conviction, and they're not going to want to deal with this. And they're going to, I think that's going to give a shot to the second citizenship market, including the CBI market, in my opinion, especially if there's still some sort of CBI program or hybrid CBI RBI program in Europe that still survives, to that point, to 2029, 2030 or onwards.
Yeah, if you can learn Hungarian, get your Hungarian citizenship by descent now for anyone who's eligible. There's a large percentage of people who are eligible, but few willing to learn a pretty difficult language to acquire it. So definitely will be valuable a couple years down the line from now.
Absolutely. CBD is a slam dunk no-brainer if you have eligibility, or you won't probably know automatically off the top if you have eligibility. You got to look into it. But if you have a parent, grandparent, or even great-grandparent that was born in a European country and was citizen in that European country, it's a slam dunk no-brainer to get screened for it and apply for it if you have, I wouldn't even say if you're certain you qualify, if you have a prima facie, case that looks like you qualify. That's an obvious one. Okay, so if nobody else has anything else to add or ask, I think we're going to wrap this up. We've been going for about an hour 35. This is another fantastic discussion. Thank you, Alex, Patrick, Patience, Jay, also David from previously for contributing. Just as a reminder, and I'll pitch these spaces. This is the 14th mobility space that we're doing this year. We're going to do 50. Okay, so we're talking about the hottest topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty. We try to avoid marketing BS and hype, and we try to actually drill down and talk about real issues that actually happen, and strategies, tactics, etc. We have our next. I typically put up a poll, okay, and offer 4 options for people to choose, for followers to choose what the next topic is going to be. But we've already nailed down what the next topic is going to be, which is Tuesday, co-hosted by Italian Stallion. I think hopefully Patrick's going to co-host as well too. And Tuesday's topic, number 15, is going to be OPSEC when passing through borders. So how to pass through borders safely, securely, privately. Okay, so we're going to be talking about practices, possible best practices as far as protecting your information. Cell phones, big topic now. A lot of Americans learned since January 20th of this year that if you are entering the United States, whether you are an American citizen or not, the CBP has a presumption of reasonableness, okay, to search your electronic documents. So Fourth Amendment searches have to be reasonable. If you're at the border, there's an automatic presumption of reasonableness. And that means that people can and have had their cell phones and their laptops searched. There's been a bunch of high-profile incidents, especially including lawyers, okay? So that's an issue, okay? If you are a lawyer, if you are a consultant, if you are a business person, if you're somebody that just cares a lot about your privacy, you got to figure out what you're going to do when you're crossing borders with electronic devices. And I think we're pretty much almost all of us are crossing with electronic devices now. Okay. So we're going to talk about that on Tuesday. We're going to get Italian Stallion's view. Patrick, I'm going to basically give my view of what I think is best practices so far. Of course, that's a dynamic situation. So anyway, that's it. Please join us if you like this one. Join us on Tuesday. It's going to be 11. So we typically do these Mondays and Thursdays, these spaces, but we're doing next week's on Tuesdays and Thursday. Tuesday to accommodate Italian Stallion schedule. So Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's West Coast time. Join us if you like. Anybody can talk. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one. Have a great 4th of July if you're in the United States, and have a great weekend otherwise.